Welcome back, everybody, to Olympus Astrology, and we're having another look at Taylor Swift's chart. She is a fascination for me at the moment. That's actually not true. I'm literally just doing it because she's popular and I want to be popular too. So actually, it is a great example chart. I do, yeah, anyway, whatever. So Taylor Swift, we're going to dive right in. Again, we talked in the last video about why she's so famous, why she's successful, why she's popular, blah, 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 all the boring stuff, as I said before. And today we're going to look at her more private implications in the chart, her more internal world, her spiritual lessons, spiritual learning, her development. This is actually, it's funny, I intuitively just structured this the same way I structure my readings. The first one, we look at the material side of your life, and then the second one, the spiritual side and the inner and deeper side, the stories. And so I do the spiritual stuff at the second reading, if you want to book one, basically just because a lot of people aren't ready. I've found a lot of people aren't ready for that. And if I just come out with it up front, it can be a bit confronting for people if I just start with this spiritual journey stuff, which is quite deep. And yeah, so it's actually, I'm just protecting myself. And there's a practical reason as well. Anyway, I'll stop banging on about my readings. If you want one, check out the link in my description because they are fantastic and life-changing. And if I had a fucking reading like that 10 years ago when I started my journey, I would have spent all my money on it, because it is absolutely priceless, knowing the context of why you are where you are right now. This is just going to turn into a plug, right? Isn't it? Yeah, let's just go for another 5 minutes talking about my readings. I will stop. Let's dive into Taylor Swift. So here we are. Mars on the Ascendant. Remember to check out my readings at the website, olympus-astrology.com. Link in my description. Now on to Taylor Swift. For real this time. So, Mars on the Ascendant we see here, as we talked before. So this is her Almuten. You can see the little crown above its head here. Almuten in the top right. Mars with a crown on his head. And he is that means that he's the ruler of her chart and that she is Mars, which is pretty interesting considering considering that she's a woman, to put it really simple. Mars, of course, is an extremely masculine planet, extremely fiery, very determined, very aggressive, very sexual as well. There's sort of male sexuality, which is very hot. In the Taoism, they describe the male Jing as being very, very hot and easily dispersed, easily lost, so a man gets very aroused very quickly and then ejaculates very quickly, and the energy's just gone. That's Mars. In fact, in the ancient books, they even say that Mars rules ejaculation because it's this rushing of fluid out of the body. Mars is everything that rushes forward is under Mars. So Mars is a very male planet. So whenever he comes up as Almuten in a female chart, it's a very interesting story. It's kind of complicated. You might even think that she's a bit of a tomboy, a bit more male than female. Actually, my girlfriend's daughter has Mars on the Ascendant. And when she was looked at by a psychic, the psychic said, "Oh, she said to Melissa, is your child a boy? Do you have a son?" And she's like, "Well, no. It's a daughter." And she goes, "Okay, well, she's very, very male." And it's true, she is very male, very masculine is a better way of saying that. So probably Taylor Swift is quite a masculine character, very determined. The defining characteristic of Mars is that they will not tolerate a boss. So they are entrepreneurial by their very nature. They always have to work for themselves. And they will stop at nothing. They're indomitable, stop at nothing to achieve their goals. Now, Mars on the Ascendant as well is a traveler. Generally, they're foreigners. I don't think she is. She was born in New York. So Taylor Swift here, 7440. I think, pretty sure, yeah, USA, New York. There we go. So this is New York. And she is obviously still lives in America. Or at the very least, she's an American idol, American pop star idol thing, whatever. I just realized I quoted the name of a TV show there without realizing it. So Generally, it's travelers. Obviously, she's traveled a lot. Why wouldn't you when you're that successful? And Mars is very sexual. So she would have probably a much higher sex drive than an ordinary woman, maybe, and be much more ready to deal with confrontation and be more front on. It is surprising that she's so tall. Physical traits are very hard to pin down with astrology in my experience. I haven't, that being said, I haven't practiced a huge amount. I also haven't found a good source on how to do it. But yeah, Mars is generally middle height. So usually when Mars shows up, a person is actually not that tall. Perhaps this Moon-Jupiter conjunction makes her tall, and then Saturn, the opposition with Saturn, but that's not very convincing for me. The other possibility is that this actually isn't her birth time. This could be a wrong birth time. There is always that. I do not do readings for Taylor Swift personally. If you're watching this, Taylor, you can book a session with me if you would like. That would be fun. There are some, until you do something with a person one-on-one, then you're not really sure about the birth time. And even then, sometimes they come to you and they say, oh my God, I've had the wrong birth time this entire time. And that's a nightmare usually. So anyway, Mars rising, that's what we would say. And it is in the crown of Scorpio, which is extremely deep. So the crown of Scorpio is a sacred zone. It's to do with meditation, willpower, and overcoming the limitations of the physical body. That's the other thing about Mars in an angle, especially at night. It makes athletes. They're generally very athletic. So I think she's obviously she's a singer, but dancer as well, perhaps. There's some athletic ability or some athletic tendency there. It is interesting that she's a singer with this kind of chart going on, because generally there you would see Venus in a financial house. So that would be the 2nd or the 6th or the 10th, or some other thing with Venus. Venus would be angular, maybe. But here we have Mars angular, so that's very interesting. A little sus about this birth time, to be honest. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a good example of how to use ancient astrology. And this crown of Scorpio, generally they're interested in Buddhism. My dad, who's been a Buddhist, has been a Buddhist his pretty much entire life as a Westerner, which is pretty remarkable, has exactly the exact same ascendant as Taylor Swift. Which is funny. And he also happens to be a Mars Almuten, so that's interesting. Now, so that's meditation, most of all. So this would be somebody... Now, with Mars in the sacred zone, it usually means there's a bit of a quote-unquote trespass or a sin, you could even call it. They have some lesson to learn still on their journey on that path. And through, when it's Mars, it's through anger or anger, impulse, frustration, sexuality as well. Too much lust. That can be the idea. And I don't know much about Taylor Swift, but from what my friends have told me, that probably is the test. So what we're seeing here is whatever the theme around sexuality is, with Mars being sexual, and especially for a woman, Mars can also be this heat, the direct aggression. So let's say that as well. Aggression, sexuality, sexual drive. This is actually a theme that's followed her through quite a few lifetimes, and she hasn't mastered it yet. She's still working on it. It is a night Mars, so it's not so bad, but she's still working on it, and this comes up in other places as well. And the path of meditation, willpower, that would really help her. In fact, we might be able to even guess that in a past life she perhaps lived in some kind of monastery where they were doing all kinds of meditation, that sort of thing, but she couldn't hack it, perhaps because she was too angry, or there was, had too many sexual urges, something like that. The other possibility is that she did quite well in the past spiritually, and this lifetime is a test where she can gain a lot of spiritual abilities by overcoming her intense frustration and intense sexuality. However, it's generally not that simple. It's generally more simple than that. Usually, if it's a bad planet in a sacred zone, then they've done some funny stuff. And if it's a good planet, then they've done good stuff. So onto the good stuff. Venus at the bottom of the chart there is in the horns of Capricorn in the 3rd house. Another strong marker of sexual urges, basically, is the idea of sexuality. Very strong marker of sexuality there with Venus in the horns. It's also spiritual as well, but it's morally neutral. So again, and the Pleiades come up in her chart too. You can see the Pleiades on the descendant. The star Rigel, which is wealth and success. Should have included that in the last video. But the Pleiades here is magic and seduction. Same with the horns of Capricorn. Sexuality, raw sexuality. So the Pleiades and the horns of Capricorn, so these are morally neutral spiritual zones. So we don't, and I've been doing some readings with my friend recently on these famous people, Colin at Lugal's World, go check him out. And a lot of the time we see this with the famous people, that they have these bad planets in the sacred zones. They're not as bright spiritually, let's say. They're much more, it takes a lot more, they have a lot more tests to overcome. That's the best way that I can say it. I'm not going to jump out and say they're bad people. I don't know that for sure. But looking at the chart, they're going through some tests and they're not, this is a chart where I look at it, she's got a lot of tests there, especially around sexuality and magic, and maybe she's not quite passing them. It's not saying that she's doing a terrible job, but she's kind of not doing as well as you might hope. If you're on a spiritual path, you want to conquer all your tests, so that would hopefully show up in your chart. But when it shows up kind of like this, well, there's a lot of spiritual interest and aspiration, but perhaps it's not fully matured. Maybe that's the idea here. So there's a choice, because these zones are morally neutral, there's a choice between good and evil, and perhaps she's veering a bit more towards the selfish side of things, Good being giving up of yourself, self-abnegation, and evil being selfishness, self-centeredness. So it's very interesting. There's definitely a strong spiritual interest here with this chart. Definitely. There's no doubt about that in my mind. She may be sort of in the Masons, ? These big famous people, they have all these weird culty ritual type things, spiritual ritual culty things. I don't know how to describe it. So that's why a lot of the time these spiritual zones show up in their charts. And they're, more often than not, they're not super bright. They're more of these test type omens that come up. The last thing I want to look at is her Saturn-Jupiter opposition, and also Saturn-Moon, which is really interesting. This is very protected by Jupiter, which is good. And it's happening in financial houses. So whenever that Saturn-Jupiter would be activated for her, she would experience financial losses. Because, why is that? Yes, it's in financial houses, fair enough. But the reason it's specifically financial losses, number one, it's a nighttime chart. Saturn in a night chart is, Saturn in the second in a night chart is financial losses. At whenever that Saturn is activated really strongly by primary direction or solar return, some really important prediction. I'm not just talking about, Mercury is conjunct with my Saturn, I'm going to lose money. It's like, no, you're not. But if it comes up in a PD, in a primary direction, yes, you are. Be very sure of it. And the other reason is because that Saturn is opposite Jupiter. The Jupiter-Saturn combo is about money and real estate. When they're in a square or an opposition, it's about the loss of money or real estate, and the person has to go through these periods of loss and of financial breakdown, basically. But this Moon-Jupiter conjunction obviously way overrides all of that. Jupiter's on the summer solstice, Saturn is on the winter solstice, which is pretty good for Saturn. So it's very harmonious, even though there is this opposition. So yes, there will be tests on the material level. There'll be some difficult moments, but very not difficult to deal with really in the end. So I hope that has interested you all. And if you want a longer version, you can go check out my Patreon down below, although I don't know how much more I can add to this, but there will be other much longer videos of a similar style on my Patreon. So if you enjoy this, please check that out and support me. It means a lot. And give this video a like, and I will see you on the other side. Ka-chow. Bye-bye.